The morning count had become Tavian's most dreaded ritual. 23 souls remained in the Warren Street compound, down from 27 just a week ago. He stood on the crumbling rooftop of what had once been an elementary school, his calloused hands gripping the rusted railing as he surveyed the wasteland that stretched beyond their reinforced walls. Smoke rose from distant fires that never seemed to extinguish, and the ever-present moans of the infected carried on the wind like a funeral dirge that never ended. Below in the courtyard, Solene was running inventory again, though Tavian already knew what she would report. Their supplies had dwindled to critical levels. 3 cans of beans. A bag of rice with weevils. Water for maybe 4 more days if they rationed severely. The garden that had sustained them through the summer had withered when their last working well pump finally gave out, and the rain barrels held nothing but the memory of better times. Tavian descended the ladder, his boots hitting the concrete with a hollow thud that echoed off the walls. Solene looked up from her clipboard, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid, her face gaunt in a way that made her cheekbones too prominent. She had been an accountant before the fall, meticulous with numbers. Now she counted the days until they starved. 3 days, she said without preamble. Maybe 4 if we cut the children's portions again, but Rhiannon says we can't. Little Kale is already showing signs of malnutrition. Tavian felt the weight of leadership settle heavier on his shoulders. He had never asked to be in charge. Leadership had simply fallen to him when Demetrios, their previous leader, had been bitten during a supply run 6 months ago. Demetrios had walked into the infected zone himself before turning, sparing them all the horror of watching him change. Then we go out, Tavian said quietly. Today. Solene's gray eyes widened. Tavian, we lost Cormac and Esme last week on a run that brought back almost nothing. We can't afford to lose anyone else. We barely have enough people to maintain perimeter security. We can't afford not to try. Tavian moved past her toward the main building where the others would be gathering for the morning meeting. If we stay, we die slowly. At least out there, we have a chance. The community room had once been a cafeteria where children ate chicken nuggets and complained about homework. Now it served as their council chamber, sleeping quarters, and church all at once. Rhiannon sat near the window, her medical bag never far from her side despite containing only a few bandages and half a bottle of antibiotics. She had been a veterinarian before, but in this new world, the skills translated well enough to keep people alive, when there was enough food to sustain life in the first place. Kale sat beside her, the boy barely 16 but aged beyond his years. He had lost his entire family in the first weeks of the outbreak and had survived alone for months before finding the Warren Street compound. His skills as a scout were unmatched, his small frame and quick reflexes allowing him to slip through infected zones that would trap larger, slower adults. Leor was checking the weapons, his mechanical mind always working on solutions to problems that had no good answers. The engineer had rigged their defenses, their water collection systems, and every functional piece of equipment they still possessed. But even genius could not create food from nothing. We need to talk about options, Tavian began, and the room fell silent. Even the children, huddled in the corner with their makeshift toys, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Rhiannon spoke first, her voice carrying the clinical detachment she used when delivering bad news. We have 12 adults capable of physical labor, 4 elderly who can help with light tasks, and 7 children. Without food, the children will be the first to suffer serious health consequences. We're already seeing it. I can go farther, Kale interjected, his young voice cracking. There's a shopping district about 4 miles east. I've seen it from the ridge. It might not have been completely looted. 4 miles might as well have been 40 in a world where every street corner could hide death. The infected had grown more numerous as survivors grew scarce, drawn to the few remaining pockets of human life like moths to a dying flame. Tavian looked around the room at the faces that depended on him. We'll need a team. Small, fast, in and out before the infected can swarm. Solene, Kale, Leor, and myself. We leave at first light tomorrow. The decision was made, and in the silence that followed, Tavian could hear the collective held breath of a community gambling everything on one desperate chance. The pre-dawn darkness provided cover, but it also concealed threats. Tavian led the team through the compound's eastern gate, a section of reinforced chain-link fence that Lior had jury-rigged with a silent opening mechanism. Every sound felt amplified in the stillness, from the scrape of their boots on asphalt to the rustle of their supply packs. Solene moved beside Tavian, her crowbar gripped in white-knuckled hands. She had become proficient with the weapon out of necessity, though he knew she still remembered what it felt like to use spreadsheets instead of blunt instruments. Behind them, Lior carried a modified nail gun that fired with compressed air, silent but deadly at close range. Cale brought up the rear, his youth making him the fastest runner if they needed someone to lead infected away from the group. The suburban streets they traversed had become a haunting monument to normalcy interrupted. Cars sat abandoned mid-commute, their doors hanging open as if their owners might return at any moment. Gardens had grown wild, reclaiming sidewalks and driveways. A child's bicycle lay rusted in the middle of the road, and Tavian forced himself not to think about what had happened to its owner. The first infected they encountered was a solitary figure, shambling between houses with the distinctive jerky gait of the turned. It had been a woman once, wearing the tattered remains of a postal uniform. Cale spotted her first, raising his hand in the signal for halt. They pressed against the shell of a burned-out SUV, barely breathing as the infected wandered past, close enough that Tavian could smell the sickly sweet stench of decay. When it passed, Solene released a shaky breath. "How many do you think are out here?" "Thousands," Lior whispered back. "Maybe tens of thousands in the greater metro area. They don't die unless you destroy the brain, and they don't need food or water. Just us." They continued east, using Cale's knowledge of safe routes through backyards and over fences. The boy navigated with an instinct that Tavian had come to trust completely, avoiding main streets where infected tended to congregate in larger numbers. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of red that reminded Tavian uncomfortably of blood, they had covered nearly 3 miles. The shopping district materialized through the morning haze like a mirage. Storefronts with shattered windows stared at them like empty eye sockets. The parking lot was a graveyard of vehicles, and Tavian could see dark shapes moving between them, the infected drawn to this place by some instinct or memory of when it had been full of life and noise and humanity. There, Cale pointed to a supermarket at the far end of the complex. The loading dock and back. Fewer infected, and if the emergency shutters came down, there might be supplies inside that others couldn't reach. It was sound reasoning, but getting to the loading dock meant crossing 200 yards of exposed parking lot. Tavian studied the infected, counting at least a dozen visible, likely more inside the structures. They moved with varying degrees of coordination, some were fresh enough to move quickly, others were degraded to the point of barely functioning, their bodies falling apart even as the virus kept them animated. "We need a distraction," Solene said, following his gaze. "Something to draw them away from our path." Lior was already rummaging in his pack. He produced a small device, cobbled together from a kitchen timer and an emergency radio. "Give me 2 minutes to get this set up on the far side. When it goes off, they'll swarm toward the sound. You'll have maybe 5 minutes before they lose interest and spread out again." "That's not enough time," Tavian protested, but Lior was already moving, using the cover of parked cars to circle around. They watched him go, a lone figure darting between vehicles with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this too many times before. The wait was agonizing. Tavian counted seconds in his head, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Beside him, Solene's breathing had become shallow, her eyes fixed on the supermarket entrance. Cale seemed almost preternaturally calm, but Tavian noticed the boy's hand trembling slightly where it gripped his knife. The explosion of sound from the emergency radio shattered the morning silence. Every infected in sight jerked toward the noise, their collective moan rising like a wave. They moved as a mass toward the far end of the parking lot, and Tavian didn't hesitate. "Now! Move!" They ran, staying low, weaving between cars as quickly as silence would allow. Halfway across, Tavian's boot caught on something and he went down hard, his knee slamming into the pavement. Pain shot through his leg, but Solene was there instantly, hauling him up with surprising strength. "Keep moving," she hissed, and he did, limping but functional. The loading dock loomed ahead, and blessed relief, the security shutter was down but damaged, bent upward at one corner enough for a person to slide through. Cale reached it first and dropped to his belly, wriggling through the gap. Solene followed, then Tavian, the rough metal scraping his back even through his jacket. Inside was darkness and the musty smell of food gone bad. Tavian clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal pallets of supplies, boxes and crates that might contain salvation or might contain nothing but disappointment. Behind them, Leor slipped through the gap, breathing hard. "They're swarming the radio. We've got minutes, maybe less. Let's make them count." They spread out, tearing into boxes with desperate efficiency. The first 3 held only office supplies and cleaning products, useless now. But the fourth made Tavian's heart leap. Canned goods, dozens of them, beans and vegetables and fruit. The 5th had bottled water, the 6th had rice and pasta. "It's a fortune," Solene breathed, already loading her pack. "This could feed us for months." But even as hope surged, a sound from deeper in the building made them freeze. A moan, low and close, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond the loading area. They were not alone. The moan came again, followed by the distinctive shuffle of feet dragging across concrete. Tavian's flashlight beam swept across the interior of the supermarket's back storage area, catching movement in the shadows between towering shelves. Not one infected, he realized with growing dread. Multiple. "How many?" Solene whispered, her crowbar raised. Cale had moved to a better vantage point, his young eyes adjusting to the darkness faster than the adults. 6, maybe 7. They're clustered near the door to the main store. They must have been trapped when the power failed and the security doors locked. Leor was still loading supplies with mechanical efficiency, his engineer's mind calculating odds. "We can take 6. We have to. We're not leaving without this food." Tavian knew he was right, but the math was brutal. For against 6 or 7, in close quarters, with limited light. One bite was all it took. One scratch if it broke the skin. He had seen too many people turn, had held too many hands as the fever took them and the humanity drained from their eyes. "We clear a path," Tavian decided. "Leor, Solene, you keep loading. Take everything you can carry. Cale and I will handle the infected. We funnel them through this narrow aisle, take them one at a time." The plan was simple, which in Tavian's experience meant it would probably go wrong. But they were committed now, the radio distraction outside would not last much longer, and returning empty-handed was not an option when children were starving. Cale moved with him toward the infected, the boy's knife gleaming in the flashlight beam. The first one lurched toward them, a teenage kid in a stockroom vest, his name tag still visible, Marcus Happy to Help. The irony was not lost on Tavian as he stepped forward and drove his reinforced baton into the infected skull with a sickening crunch. The body dropped, and immediately 2 more filled the space, drawn by the noise and movement. Cale was a blur, sliding past Tavian's left side and hamstringing one of the infected with a precise cut. It fell, and Tavian finished it while Cale engaged the third. But the narrow aisle plan fell apart when an infected came from an unexpected angle, climbing over a shelf with terrifying agility. It was a fresh one, recently turned, still possessing much of its human coordination. It dropped onto Leor's back, and the engineer went down with a shout that echoed through the building. Solene reacted instantly, swinging her crowbar in an arc that caught the infected in the side of the head. It staggered but did not fall, turning toward her with a hiss that sounded almost angry. She swung again, and this time the hooked end of the crowbar pierced its skull, sticking fast. The infected fell, taking Solene's weapon with it. She struggled to pull it free as 2 more infected rounded the corner, attracted by the commotion. Tavian was there in seconds, his baton rising and falling with grim efficiency, but his injured knee buckled and he went down. The infected loomed over him, a woman in a floral dress, her jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. Tavian could see down her ruined throat as she bent toward him, her hands reaching for his face. Then her head snapped back, and she collapsed. Behind her stood Cale, his knife dripping black ichor. "We need to go," the boy said, offering his hand. "Now." Tavian let himself be pulled up, his heart hammering. Leor was back on his feet, shaken but unbitten. Solene had retrieved her crowbar and was already at the gap in the security shutter, her pack bulging with supplies. "Wait," Leor said suddenly, his flashlight beam catching something on the wall. "Look at this." It was a map, posted on a bulletin board near what had probably been a manager's office. But it was not a store layout. It was hand-drawn, crude but clear, showing the surrounding area. And marked on it, circled in red marker, was a location about 10 miles north. Distribution Center was written in block letters, with an arrow in the note, "Full stock emergency supply." Cale studied the map, his finger tracing the route. "That's the regional distribution center. I've heard about it." When the outbreak started, FEMA tried to establish emergency supply caches at major distribution points. If this one was stocked and never emptied, the implications hung in the air like a prayer. A fully stocked regional distribution center could have enough food, water, and medical supplies to sustain their community for years. It could mean the difference between slow starvation and actual survival. 10 miles, Solene said quietly. Through infected territory. With no way to know if the supplies are even still there, or if we can access them. Tavian pulled out his camera, a small digital model that still held a charge, and photographed the map. "We get back to the compound with what we have. We plan properly. This is too big to rush." Outside, the morning had fully broken, and the sound of the radio had finally died. The infected would be spreading out again, returning to their aimless wandering. The team slipped back through the gap one by one, emerging into daylight with their packs heavy with provisions. The return journey was tense but uneventful. They moved quickly, taking a different route to avoid any infected that might have remained near their entry path. When the walls of the Warren Street compound came into view, Tavian felt a relief so profound it almost brought him to his knees. Rhiannon was waiting at the gate, her face transforming from worry to joy as she saw their laden packs. "You made it. Thank God, you made it." That evening, as the community gathered to divide the supplies and hear about the discovery, Tavian saw hope kindle in eyes that had been dead with despair. They ate that night, not well, but enough. The children had seconds. Esme's granddaughter, little Mira, smiled for the first time in weeks. But as Tavian lay on his bedroll that night, studying the photograph of the map, he knew the real challenge lay ahead. 10 miles might as well be 1,000 in this world. And the question that kept him awake was not whether they could make it, but how many of them would die trying. The debate lasted 3 days. In the community room, voices rose and fell in waves of hope and fear as they argued about the distribution center. Rhiannon was adamant that they could not risk their best scavengers on what might be a fool's errand. "We have food now," she insisted, her hands gesturing at the carefully rationed supplies from the supermarket run. "Enough to last 6 weeks if we're careful. Why risk everything on a maybe?" But Leor had done the calculations, writing them on a salvaged whiteboard in precise engineer's notation. 6 weeks, then we're back where we started. The distribution center represents long-term survival. Medicine, preserved food, possibly fuel and equipment. We cannot afford to ignore it. Solene stood beside a reconstructed version of the map, having drawn it from memory on a larger scale. The route takes us through the industrial district. During the outbreak, people fled toward residential areas or government evacuation points. Industry was abandoned early. There should be fewer infected. Cale had spent the 3 days doing what he did best, scouting. He had climbed to the highest accessible point in the compound, a church steeple 3 blocks in, and used a pair of binoculars to survey the territory to the north. "I can see the distribution center," he reported. "It's a massive warehouse complex, surrounded by a fence. I saw movement inside the fence, but I couldn't tell if it was infected or something else." Something else. The words hung in the air, unspoken possibilities. Other survivors could mean allies, or they could mean competition. In the months since the fall, Tavian had encountered both, and he knew which was more common. On the morning of the fourth day, Tavian made the decision. We go. But we do it right. This isn't a supply run, it's an expedition. We take a larger team, more weapons, and we plan for a multi-day operation. The team assembled in the courtyard at dawn. Tavian, Solene, Kale, and Leor would be joined by 3 others. Rhiannon had insisted on coming despite protests, arguing that if they found medical supplies, someone needed to identify what was useful. Joining them were Caspian, a former firefighter whose strength and calm under pressure made him invaluable, and Yara, a quiet woman who had been a marathon runner and could move faster and longer than anyone else in the compound. 7 people. It was a huge risk, nearly a third of their able-bodied adults. But as Tavian looked at the faces of the children watching from the windows, he knew it was necessary. This was not just about survival anymore. It was about having a future worth surviving for. They left in the gray light before sunrise, moving in a tight formation that Caspian had drilled them on. The big man took point, his fire axe carried with the casual competence of someone who knew how to use it. Kale ranged ahead as scout, staying within visual range but far enough to provide early warning. Rhiannon stayed in the center, protected, her medical knowledge too valuable to risk in direct combat. The first mile passed without incident, through suburban ruins they had traversed before. But as they moved into unfamiliar territory, the landscape began to change. Homes gave way to strip malls, then to industrial parks. Warehouses loomed like metal mountains, their loading docks gaping open like hungry mouths. Movement, Kale signaled from ahead, dropping into a crouch behind an overturned delivery truck. They froze, following his gaze. A group of infected, at least 20, were clustered around the entrance to a factory. But they were not wandering randomly. They were pressed against a rolling door, pounding on it with mindless persistence. Someone's inside, Yara whispered. Or they think someone is. We go around, Tavian decided. We're not here to rescue everyone. We have a mission. The words felt like ash in his mouth, but they were true. They skirted the factory, using the maze of industrial buildings for cover. Behind them, the pounding continued, a rhythmic drumbeat of the damned. By midday, they had covered 5 miles and the sun was brutal overhead. They took shelter in the hollow shell of a manufacturing plant, sharing precious water and granola bars that Rhiannon had insisted they bring. Tavian's knee, injured in the supermarket, throbbed with each step, but he said nothing. Solene noticed anyway. She always noticed. You're favoring that leg. It's fine. Tavian. I said it's fine. His tone was sharper than intended, born of pain and stress. He saw hurt flash across her face and immediately regretted it. Sorry. I'm sorry. It hurts, but I can manage. She nodded, understanding without forgiving, and moved away to check on the others. Tavian watched her go, thinking about all the things he had never said to her, words that felt foolish in a world where tomorrow was never guaranteed. You care about her, Rhiannon said, settling down beside him. The doctor had a way of stating observations like diagnoses. We all care about each other. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Rhiannon took a sip from her water bottle. Before all this, I would have said you had all the time in the world to figure out your feelings. Now? Tavian, we might die tomorrow. Today, even. Don't waste the time you have. Before he could respond, Kale appeared in the doorway, his face pale. You need to see this. They followed him to a window overlooking what had once been an employee parking lot. What they saw made Tavian's blood run cold. The lot was full of infected, hundreds of them, maybe 1,000. They filled the space like a grotesque parody of Rush Hour, shambling in what seemed like random patterns but was, Tavian realized, a slow migration. They're moving north, Leor observed, his analytical mind working even in the face of horror. The same direction we're going. Caspian gripped his axe tighter. We can't fight through that. We'd be overwhelmed in seconds. We don't fight, Kale said. We wait. Let them pass. It might take hours, but it's safer than the alternative. So they waited, watching the tide of the dead flow past their hiding place. Tavian used the time to study the map, calculating alternate routes. But every path led through danger, and the distribution center sat on the other side of this nightmare horde. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the flow of infected finally thinned. Stragglers stumbled past, but the main mass had moved on, drawn by whatever instinct or stimulus guided their collective movement. We move at night, Tavian decided. It's riskier, but we can use the darkness for cover. And we need to make up time. They prepared in silence, checking weapons and securing packs. As they filed out into the gathering dark, Tavian caught Solene's hand. She looked at him, surprised. Rhiannon's right, he said quietly. We might not have tomorrow. So I need you to know that A scream split the night, close and human and terrified. It came from somewhere to the east, cutting off abruptly in a way that needed no explanation. The sound galvanized them. They moved toward the distribution center with renewed urgency, knowing that every second of delay was another second closer to their own potential deaths. The building materialized ahead of them, exactly as Cale had described, a massive warehouse complex surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. And inside the fence, silhouettes moved in the darkness, upright and purposeful in a way that infected were not. Survivors. Or something worse. The fence surrounding the distribution center was intact, a rare sight in the ruins of the old world. Tavian signaled for the team to take cover behind a line of abandoned semi-trucks while they assessed the situation. Through gaps in the fence, they could see the warehouse complex clearly now, 3 massive buildings arranged in a U-shape around a central loading area, and moving between them were people, definitely people, carrying supplies and weapons. At least 20 individuals visible, Lior whispered, watching through a compact pair of binoculars. Armed, organized. They've got the perimeter lit with what looks like generator-powered lights. That's significant power consumption. They must have fuel reserves. Cale pointed to the main gate. Guards. 2 of them, and they don't look friendly. The boy was right. The 2 figures stationed at the gate carried rifles and stood with the alert posture of people expecting trouble. This was not a community of desperate survivors huddling together for warmth. This was something more structured, possibly military, possibly something else entirely. We need to decide, Caspian said, his firefighter's pragmatism cutting through speculation. Approach openly and hope they're friendly, try to sneak in and take what we need, or walk away. Rhiannon shook her head firmly. We can't walk away. You all saw the medical supplies marked on the map. We have people back home who will die without antibiotics, without proper equipment. Whatever the risk, we have to try. Tavian felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders again. 7 lives in his hands, and 23 more back at Warren Street depending on his decision. He thought about the children, about Esme's granddaughter and her gap-toothed smile, about all the futures that would end if he chose wrong. We approach openly, he decided. But carefully. Solene, Yara, Rhiannon, you 3 stay here with the packs and most of our supplies. If this goes bad, you run back to Warren Street. The rest of us will make contact. Solene started to protest, but Tavian cut her off with a look. Please. I need to know you're safe. Something in his tone stopped her argument. She nodded slowly, and Tavian felt both relief and regret. If this went wrong, he might never get to finish the sentence she had interrupted earlier. Tavian, Lior, Cale, and Caspian approached the gate with their weapons lowered but visible, hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. The guards spotted them immediately, rifles coming up to aim at center mass. That's close enough, one of them called out. She was a woman in her 40s, hard-eyed and scarred, wearing mismatched tactical gear. State your business. We're from a community about 10 miles south, Tavian called back. We're looking for supplies. Medicine, food. We have things to trade. The guards exchanged glances. The second one, a younger man with a shaved head, spoke into a radio. They waited, exposed and vulnerable, while inside the compound people stopped their activities to watch the confrontation. After what felt like an eternity, the gates began to roll open. But instead of welcome, a dozen armed people filed out, forming a semicircle around Tavian's group. At their center was a man who carried authority like a weapon. He was tall, well-fed in a way that spoke of ample supplies, with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that assessed them with cold calculation. "I'm Corvus," he said without preamble. "I run this facility. You say you want to trade, but I see 4 people carrying nearly empty packs and wearing the look of desperation. What exactly do you have that we would want?" It was Lior who answered, his engineer's mind finding the angle. "Skills. I can repair generators, jury-rig electrical systems, build water filtration from salvage. My friend here," he nodded to Caspian, "has firefighting and emergency response training. The boy is the best scout you'll ever meet. And our leader has kept a community alive for 6 months in this hell. That has to be worth something." Corvus's expression did not change, but Tavian saw interest flicker in his eyes. "Skills are valuable, true. But we have skilled people. What we need is labor and loyalty. This facility is the last bastion of civilization in this region. We've defended it against the infected and against other survivor groups that thought they could take what we've built. We survive through strength and discipline. We're not looking for a fight," Tavian said carefully. "Just a trade. Medical supplies mainly. We have children who are sick." "Children?" Corvus smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "How many people in your community?" Something about the question made Tavian's instincts scream warning. "Enough," he said vaguely. "Where exactly is this community?" "South. Like I said." Corvus's smile faded. "You know what I think? I think you have a small group, poorly defended, with supplies running out. I think you're desperate. And I think you came here hoping to find salvation." He gestured at the compound behind him. "Well, you found it. But salvation comes with a price." "Name it," Tavian said, though dread was building in his gut. "Join us. All of you. Bring your people here, submit to our authority and our rules, and you'll have access to everything we've built. Protection, food, medicine. All of it." Corvus stepped closer. "Refuse, and you get nothing. And if you try to take what isn't freely given, we have the numbers and firepower to stop you." Kale shifted beside Tavian, his hand moving subtly toward his knife. Caspian's grip tightened on his axe. The armed guards around them tensed in response, fingers moving to triggers. "We need to discuss this with our community," Tavian said, fighting to keep his voice level. "You're asking us to abandon our home. I'm offering you survival. The distribution center has enough supplies for 100 people for 5 years. But resources aren't unlimited. We can't just give them away to every desperate group that wanders up. Either you join our collective, or you leave empty-handed. You have until sunrise to decide." Corvus turned and walked back through the gate, leaving his guards to watch Tavian's group. The message was clear: they were not prisoners, but they were not free to enter either. Back at the truck line, Tavian explained the situation to the women. Rhiannon looked stricken, Yara angry, but Solene just looked tired. "We can't join them," she said flatly. "Did you see how his people looked at us? Like we were livestock. That's not community, that's conquest dressed up in civilized language." "But the supplies," Rhiannon protested. "The medicine. We have people who will die without it. And how long before we regret putting ourselves under someone like Corvus?" Lior countered. "He's a tyrant. Maybe a necessary one for his people, but we'd be giving up our autonomy, our freedom to make our own choices." Tavian listened to them argue, feeling the impossible weight of the decision. Return empty-handed and watch their community slowly starve, or surrender their independence to a man whose eyes held no warmth. "There's a third option," Kale said quietly. All eyes turned to the boy. "We take what we need. Tonight. While they're sleeping." "That's suicide," Caspian said immediately. We're 7 against more than 20, on their territory, with their advantage. Not if we're smart, Cale insisted. I spotted a gap in the fence on the east side, where it meets the tree line. The buildings block the light from the generators on that side. I could slip in, find the medical supplies, and get out before they even know we're there. Absolutely not, Tavian said. I won't risk you like that. You won't risk me? Cale's voice cracked with emotion. Tavian, I'm already at risk. We all are. Every day we've survived has been a risk. At least this way, it means something. Those kids back home, Mira and the others, they deserve a chance. Let me give them one. In the boy's eyes, Tavian saw a reflection of his own desperation and determination. Cale had lost everything in this apocalypse, but he had found purpose in protecting others. Who was Tavian to take that away? Not alone, Tavian finally said. We do this together, or not at all. They spent the remaining hours of darkness planning, using Lior's tactical mind and Cale's observational skills to map out the compound's weak points. When the deepest part of night arrived, the 4 hours before dawn when even guards grew tired and less alert, they moved. Cale led them to the gap in the fence, a place where roots had pushed up the chain link enough for a person to squeeze under. One by one, they slipped through into the compound, their hearts hammering, knowing that every second inside was a second closer to discovery or death. Inside the fence, the distribution center was a landscape of shadows and danger. Generator lights illuminated the main loading area in harsh white pools, but between the warehouses darkness reigned. Tavian led the infiltration team, Cale, Lior, and Caspian, while Solene, Rhiannon, and Yara maintained watch at their exit point, ready to signal if guards approached. Cale had identified the most likely location for medical supplies, the smallest of the 3 warehouses, which according to the faded signage had been designated for pharmaceutical and medical equipment storage. They moved between storage containers and parked vehicles, freezing whenever footsteps echoed in the night. A guard walked past, close enough that Tavian could have reached out and touched him. The man was smoking, the cigarette's ember a red eye in the darkness, and he was muttering to himself about the cold and the unfairness of night watch rotation. Tavian held his breath until the guard moved on, disappearing around the corner of a building. The pharmaceutical warehouse had a loading dock with stairs leading to a human-sized door. Lior examined the lock with his flashlight covered by his fingers to create only the faintest glow. Electronic lock, but the power's off to this section. They must be conserving generator fuel. I can bypass it, give me 90 seconds. The engineer worked with swift precision, using tools he had crafted himself from salvaged materials. Tavian and Caspian kept watch, every nerve alight with tension. Cale was motionless beside them, his breathing controlled, his eyes scanning the darkness with the intensity of a predator. The lock clicked. Lior eased the door open, and they slipped inside into a darkness so complete it felt solid. Tavian risked turning on his flashlight, keeping the beam low and covered. The warehouse stretched before them, rows of shelving holding boxes and crates marked with medical terminology and pharmaceutical company logos. It's all here, Rhiannon whispered through the radio they had given her. She had insisted on coming despite the danger, and now Tavian understood why. Without her knowledge, they would have wasted precious time trying to identify what was worth taking. Look for antibiotics first. Amoxicillin, ciprofloxacin, azithromycin. Then insulin if you can find it. Painkillers. Bandages. For supplies. They split up, working with desperate efficiency. Tavian found a pallet of antibiotics, more than they could possibly carry but enough to save lives back home. Caspian located surgical supplies and trauma kits. Lior discovered a jackpot, a crate of various medications still in their original pharmacy packaging, sorted and labeled. Cale was at the far end of the warehouse when his light stopped moving. Tavian, he called softly. You need to see this. Tavian made his way through the aisles to find Cale standing before a section that made his heart sink. Behind a chain-link cage were medications, but also something else, supplies that had clearly been hoarded. Food, water, luxury items that had no place in a community allegedly rationing resources. And in the corner, a ledger. Cale had it open, reading by flashlight. They're recording trades. Other survivor groups have come here, and Corvus's people have been extorting them. Look at this entry, Highland Park Group, 15 people. Traded 5 members for medical supplies and food. Members assigned to work details. Tavian, they're not just refusing to help people. They're enslaving them. The words hung in the air like poison. Tavian thought about Corvus's offer, about joining their collective, and understood now what that really meant. This was not community. This was feudalism wearing the mask of survival. We take what we need and get out, Tavian decided. And when we're safe, we warn every survivor we can about this place. They were loading the last of their packs when the lights came on. Every fluorescent fixture in the warehouse blazed to life simultaneously, and Tavian's blood turned to ice. They had been discovered. Corvus's voice echoed through a PA system. I had hoped you would make the intelligent choice. Instead, you chose theft. Did you really think we wouldn't notice the gap in the fence? That we don't patrol our own perimeter? Armed guards were pouring through the door they had entered, cutting off that escape. Tavian looked around frantically and saw another door at the far end of the warehouse, an emergency exit. Run, he shouted, and they ran. Behind them, gunfire erupted, bullets sparking off metal shelving. Caspian roared and threw a storage container, creating a barrier that bought them seconds. They crashed through the emergency exit into the night, alarms blaring, the entire compound coming alive with activity. Outside, more guards were converging. Tavian saw Solene, Rhiannon, and Yara at the fence gap, waving frantically. They had maybe 30 seconds before they were surrounded. Go! Tavian shouted to his team. Get to the fence. Lior ran, surprisingly fast for someone carrying a heavy pack. Cale was a blur of motion. But Caspian stumbled, his pack catching on a piece of equipment, and in that moment of delay, a guard reached him. The firefighter turned, his axe swinging. The guard went down, but 2 more took his place. Caspian fought with the desperate strength of a man who knew he was out of time. Caspian. Tavian started back for him, but the big man shook his head. Get the medicine home. Caspian bellowed. Get it to the kids. Go! A bullet caught Caspian in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell but kept fighting from his knees, his axe still rising and falling. Tavian felt someone grab his arm, Cale, pulling him toward the fence with surprising strength. We can't leave him. Tavian protested, but even as he said it, more guards were surrounding Caspian, and the window of escape was closing. They reached the fence and dove through the gap. Solene was there, hauling Tavian through with frantic strength. Behind them, Caspian's defiant roar was cut short by a final gunshot that Tavian would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Then they were running through the darkness, pursued by shouts and gunfire that fell short as they plunged into the tree line. They ran until exhaustion forced them to stop, collapsing in a culvert beneath an old highway, gasping and sobbing and alive. Caspian, Rhiannon wept, and the word was both a name and a prayer. Tavian clutched his pack, feeling the weight of the medicine inside, bought with a good man's life. He had led them here. He had made the call to infiltrate. And Caspian had paid the price for his leadership. We have to keep moving, Lior said, his voice hollow. They might follow. But Corvus's people did not follow. Perhaps they were content to have made their point. Perhaps they did not want to risk their people in the darkness chasing desperate survivors. Whatever the reason, the pursuit never came. As dawn broke, they were 5 miles away, moving on sheer willpower and grief. The distribution center was behind them, along with the body of a man who had been brave and kind and strong. The journey back to Warren Street took 2 days instead of 1, slowed by exhaustion and sorrow. When the compound walls finally came into view, Tavian felt no relief, only the crushing weight of what they had lost to get there. The community gathered in the courtyard as the team stumbled through the gates. Tavian saw their faces transform from joy at the return to horror as they counted heads and found one missing. Esme, who had lost her husband to the infected months ago, let out a wail when she understood that Caspian, her nephew, was not coming home. But even grief could not stop necessity. Rhiannon went immediately to the infirmary, such as it was, her medical training overriding her personal pain. The antibiotics they had brought back saved 3 lives in the first day alone. A young man named Oren, who had been declining from an infected wound, began to show improvement within hours. 2 children suffering from respiratory infections started breathing easier. The insulin they had recovered meant that Petra, a diabetic woman in her 50s, would live to see another month. The community held a memorial for Caspian on the 3rd evening after their return. They had no body to bury, so they planted a tree instead, a young oak that Lior had found sprouting in the ruins. It seemed fitting somehow, life emerging from death, continuation in the face of loss. Tavian stood before the gathered community and spoke the words that felt wholly inadequate. Caspian gave his life so that others could live. He understood the cost of survival and paid it willingly. We honor him by living, by continuing, by making sure his sacrifice meant something. Later, as the community dispersed to their evening routines, Solene found Tavian on the rooftop where he often went to think. The sun was setting, painting the wasteland in shades of gold and crimson that almost made it beautiful. "You're blaming yourself," she said, "not a question. I led him there. I made the call to go in. And he chose to follow. He chose to fight. He chose to give us time to escape." Solene moved closer, her shoulder touching his. "Tavian, in the old world, maybe leaders could protect everyone. Maybe there were choices that didn't involve sacrifice. But that world is gone. We do what we must with what we have, and we carry the weight of it. That's what leadership means now. Does it get easier? The weight? I don't know. I hope not. The day it gets easy is the day we've lost something essential." She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Before, you were trying to tell me something. Before the scream, before everything went wrong. Do you remember?" Tavian remembered. It felt like a lifetime ago, those words interrupted by violence and death. But Solene was right, they could not afford to leave things unsaid anymore. "I was going to tell you that I care about you. More than just as a member of this community. That in this world of death and horror, you're something good, something worth fighting for." The words came easier than he expected, born of honesty and exhaustion. "And I was going to say that if we survive this, when we survive this, I'd like to see what we could build together. If you wanted that too." Solene was quiet for a long moment, and Tavian felt his heart hammering, afraid he had misread everything, that his feelings were one-sided. Then she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her exhausted face into something luminous. "I'd like that," she said simply. "I'd like that very much." They sat together as darkness fell, 2 people finding a moment of peace in a world that offered precious little. Below them, the compound was settling in for the night. Lights flickered in windows as precious candles were lit. Voices drifted up, people talking and laughing despite everything, life persisting in the cracks of the apocalypse. Cale found them an hour later, the boy's face serious. "Tavian, there's something we need to discuss. About the distribution center." They convened a council meeting that night, Tavian, Solene, Cale, Lior, and Rhiannon, along with the other community leaders. Cale laid out what they had discovered, the ledger and its records of Corvus's exploitation. "There are other survivor groups out there," Cale said. "Small communities like ours, and Corvus is preying on them. Trading temporary supplies for permanent servitude. We can't just ignore that. What can we do?" Rhiannon asked. "We're barely surviving ourselves. We can't fight Corvus's armed compound." "No," Lior agreed. "But we can warn others. We can share what we know. And maybe, if enough communities band together, we can find a way to resist. Or at least avoid becoming victims." It was Solene who saw the larger picture. "This is bigger than just survival. It's about what kind of world we rebuild. Do we let strong men like Corvus create fiefdoms built on exploitation? Or do we try to build something better, communities that help each other instead of preying on each other? The discussion lasted into the early morning hours. They made decisions that night that would shape their future. They would send scouts to find other communities, to share information and build alliances. They would continue supply runs, but with greater caution and better planning. And they would not give up on the idea that humanity could be more than just survival at any cost. As the meeting broke up and people headed to their beds, Tavian stood again on the rooftop, looking out at the ruins. Somewhere out there, Corvus was consolidating his power. Somewhere, infected wandered in their endless hunger. Somewhere, other communities struggled to survive, unaware of the dangers and possibilities that existed in this new world. But here, in the Warren Street compound, 22 people slept a little safer tonight because of the medicine they had brought back. Children would wake up tomorrow with full bellies. And slowly, painfully, they were learning to be more than just survivors. They were learning to be a community again. Tavian thought of Caspian, and of Demetrios before him, and of all the others they had lost. He thought of Soline's hand in his, and of Kale's fierce determination, and of Rhiannon's compassionate strength. He thought of the future, uncertain and dangerous but not entirely without hope. The supply runs would continue. They would face more dangers, make more impossible choices, and yes, they would probably lose more people they loved. But they would also live, and love, and fight for something better than mere existence. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Tavian made a silent promise to the memory of all those they had lost. They would survive, yes, but they would do more than that. They would build something worth surviving for. A sound from below drew his attention. Little Mira was in the courtyard, playing with a worn stuffed animal. She was singing softly to herself, a nursery rhyme from the old world. Her grandmother Esme sat nearby, watching with eyes full of grief and love and determination. Life, continuing. Life, insisting on itself despite everything. Tavian climbed down from the roof and joined them, ready to face whatever this new day would bring. The apocalypse had taken much from them, but it had not taken everything. As long as they had each other, as long as they remembered what they fought for, there was still hope. And in the end, hope was its own kind of supply run, a dangerous mission into the darkness to bring back something precious and rare, the belief that tomorrow might be better than today. The Warren Street compound would endure. They would continue their dangerous missions, their supply runs into a world that wanted them dead. Some would fall, others would rise, and through it all, they would carry forward the memory of those they had lost and the dream of what they might still build. This was survival. This was community. This was the price and the promise of living in the ruins of the old world while trying to build a new one. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the walls and the infected in the darkness, the future waited, uncertain but unwritten, full of danger and possibility in equal measure.